Spacefarer. WTUFO is brought to you by you, the viewer or listener. Thank you so much for supporting the show and for watching and listening. If you want us to keep making these episodes, please go to patreon.com/WTUFO and support us for $1 per month. Alternatively, you can do this on YouTube. I think the minimum there is $2 a month, but if you feel like giving us more, you can absolutely do that on patreon.com/WTUFO or YouTube or Buzzsprout if you can figure that one out. So please help the show continue to exist by going to patreon.com/WTUFO and supporting us for $1 a month. Thank you very much. What the UFO? I'm speaking today with Deborah Ward. Deborah, hi, it's nice to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Caleb.
Deborah,
thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. It's very much my pleasure. Deborah is a librarian by trade, so we're really excited to get into UAP resources today. We're going to help people find great trailheads to start their own research or deepen it if they've already begun. But we're especially focusing on introductory resources that we have found valuable, and we're going to go through a whole slew of different avenues into this topic with sort of a beginner's mind approach. But first, I wanted to introduce Deborah from the point of view of her career. Deborah has an undergrad degree in German with an English minor from Eastern Kentucky University. She also dabbled in French there and got a teaching certificate. And then you went back and got your master's in education. And did you also get that from Eastern Kentucky University?
I did.
Okay,
and then
cool.
I went to University of Kentucky for my master's in library science.
Okay, wow. So you have two different masters relating to library sciences?
Yes,
or
yes,
Oh,
yes, that's
okay.
true.
Wow,
There's a lot to learn about libraries. It's a big world out there.
It's an area of expertise that I don't think a lot of people think about, which is one of the reasons that I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And as you've said to me, you're a novice in the UFO world, but you are an expert in the library world, which means you're really good at finding information and helping people use their time efficiently, which we can maybe loop back around to. But I want to give people a quick overview from what you gave me about your career. These degrees in foreign language, K through 12 education, and library and information science. You started your career as a school librarian and high school classroom teacher back in the 70s, and then you moved over into health sciences librarianship for most of your career. You're an administrator of academic health science libraries, medicine, nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, veterinary medicine, allied health professions for about 20 years, and then you expanded to specialized libraries, engineering, journalism, math, geology, special collections, and you spent the last 4 years before you retired as vice provost for libraries at the University of Missouri, where the libraries serve over 30,000 students and over 5,000 faculty. So as you said, you've always had a lot to keep you busy. Does that sound like a good rundown?
That's a pretty good rundown. Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Well, I guess it would be because you wrote it. So good job. So Deborah and I got together because she was watching one of the episodes and made a comment about how she was working on a list of introductory resources. And so we've been collaborating a little bit and starting to put some things together on WTUFO.com that expand on this initial list and break it apart into various subtopics. So what we are going to do today is we're going to go through these subtopics, which include things like books, documentaries, channels and podcasts, and more. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of our favorite starting points in each of these categories. Does that sound good to you, Deborah? And is there any other table setting you think we should do before we embark on this project?
I'm all in on the concept and just want to add that when I think about what startled me the most and what got me into this topic was happening upon a podcast that was done by Lou Elizondo about 3 or 4 years ago, in which he was talking about the 5 observables.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing.
Mm.
And the more you know how it is on YouTube, where one thing leads to another, and then they put up another. And it was like, I just was like slipping down a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
And what in the world is this about? And so I figured there must be other people like that out there who, you know, having grown up in this society in which we are taught that is just absolute nonsense, to be confronted with these new realities of whistleblowers coming out and talking about what the military is experiencing. To hear Leslie Kane, for example, talk about what people have been discovering for years and even before then, and to even find out who the pioneers were, like Leonard Stringfield. It's like just been a huge education for me. And I always look at information in terms of how can I bring value by saving people time and preventing them from floundering around trying to find the best information or what's going to give me a good foundation of understanding on this topic. And so that is what led me to start making lists of the things that I thought were the most helpful to a beginner. And I am by no means an expert in any of this, but it was just my experience of trying to figure out the landscape that led me to start making these lists so that I could give them to my friends, so that they could benefit from that as well. So, if this has any value to anyone and can help anyone in any way, then I'm glad to be of service.
That's great. I think people are going to find this conversation valuable. And I just want to ping again at the top, if you want to share or if you want to explore what we're going to talk about more deeply, you can check out WTUFO.com. And the subsection we've created for this is currently called UAP Resources. We might tinker with that title, but that's what we're calling it right now. So if it's something like UFO Library, you're looking for the page where we've got a breakout of documents, papers, presentations, things like that. And it's currently called UAP Resources. So you can go a little deeper. We're not trying to be comprehensive with all these things, but we're trying to deliver the highlights and get them all in some usable locations. And this is actually not something that I've seen on other UAP sites, although there are some really useful UAP websites. Come to think of it, we should probably have a category for those.
I do have a list of websites.
Oh, great. Well, do you want to hop in with that? Should we start there since we just stumbled across it?
Well, I suppose we could. Richard Dolan has a very extensive website.
Okay.
Leslie Kane has one that features some of her writings. Those are the ones that are more my go-tos. I can say is we need to come up with a list of websites and sort of inventory those resources to provide to people. I think that would be very valuable. I mean, some people have inventoried like government documents and the congressional hearings, that sort of thing. And I have even discovered that there are some pretty extensive what librarians call bibliographies, which is a big list of all kinds of resources about these things. The problem that I have with some of those is they're so extensive that they're not useful to the beginner.
Okay. They're overwhelming.
They're overwhelming. And my perspective on this is trying to give people not an exhaustive list, but a short list. The shorter, the better, to help someone get a foundational understanding of this huge and very complicated topic.
So good point here. We will create a UFO websites resource on our UAP resources page. I'm going to pitch 3 that I like. One is uap.guide. This is a good one to give your friends or to check out yourself if you're curious. Their whole approach to this subject is just quotes from highly credible people. So they're not linking to articles or documents. They're just listing quotes in a way that's really easy to read from security advisors and senators and pilots and presidents, clustered under points like UAP exists, UAP are real objects, they move too fast, they're not new, blah, blah, blah. So UAP.
That's really cool. I love hearing that.
It's a smart approach. I recommend that people check it out. And it's a good place for you to share. It's a good site for you to share with people who are just getting started. And who think they're there. It's very striking for them to see quotes from Barack Obama and Marco Rubio.
So is this an interactive website?
It's not. It's a reading website. And it's very simple. And it's again, it's uap.guide. And we'll put this on our website list. A little more broadly, the Black Vault is an excellent collection of FOIA documents. This is the project of John Greenwald. So the Black Vault covers more than just UFOs. There's all sorts of FOIA requests here. but it probably has the single deepest collection of freedom of information requests from the US government about UAP and about myriad other topics. So that's a place to dive a little deeper, but it's a really great resource. And then I'll also mention that the National Archives of the United States have started a UFO focused page, and I will get the link to that on our UAP resources page. So that's another place where you can get official government documentation from all sorts of agencies over decades and decades. And in late 2024, the Senate passed a bill. Well, the US government passed a piece of legislation that required the National Archives to collect and publicly display all the information that it could that wasn't classified from all the agencies of government. Actually, I think they passed this in 2023, but then in 2024 they decided to give the archives an extra year because it was such a big job to collate it all. So they currently still have a deadline, I believe, of the end of 2025 to get this all up and running. But there's a fair amount of this stuff up there now. So I'll put a link to that. And it's, again, when you're starting out, it's really nice to have these official documents. And it's a little mind-blowing to see how much of that material there is, especially from the early years of like the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Wow. Just wow is what I say about that one.
Cool.
See, you learn something every day.
Yeah, there's so much to know. And
yeah.
I guess this is still introductory, but I'm so excited to be speaking with you as a librarian, especially because this is such a complex information environment that somebody with your level of expertise and your particular area of expertise is the perfect guide to navigate, as you described it, the rabbit hole. So let's move to our intuitive starting point where we would have started if we hadn't stumbled into websites, which is books. What are some of your favorite books about UFO, UAP?
Well, the one that got me hooked was Leslie Kane's book. I think I might have it within reach.
Nice. Big yeehaw, woohoo to this. Strongly.
Yes. Here are my two
UFOs.
favorite books.
Okay. Leslie Kane's is called UFOs. This is
Leslie Kane's, the one everybody knows. UFOs, generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. To 2010 publication date, but still very relevant. And for anyone who needs to have their eyes opened and to say, is this a thing? Is it real? Mm-hmm. This is the one that I turn to first to sort of figure that out. And kudos to her for being able to not only interview people who are highly capable, highly regarded, government officials, and, just what the subtitle says, people of high repute. But she puts it in language that just about anyone can understand. It's a very easy, very readable read, and which is something that librarians always look for, is something that's easy.
She has kind of like a brave quality in that she takes her own ego out of the center and gives these people the runway to tell us in their own words what they saw or what they experienced. That was a fantastic decision. She generated an epic primary source document collection that's going to stand, I think, historically as a major milestone in the development of research.
Absolutely. And to build on what you just said, I mean, some of the chapters in her book are actually written by the people who had those experiences, and which only lends more credibility to her writing.
Much more. And a writer with more ego might have said, I'll just quote them and then explain why this is important, So she did something wise and enlightened there, I think, by handing the spotlight over. And
totally agree.
Yeah. Cool. So what's your second recommendation?
Well, my second recommendation is by Richard Dolan. And Richard is a very well-known scholar in the field of UFOs, ufology. He's been at this now for over 30 years, known for his statement in which he said, I was going to explore this for 3 months, maybe 6, figure it out and move on with my career. And 30 years later, he's still at it and still applying his very sharp mind to all the new stories as they unfold. But this one he wrote specifically for the beginner, This is a compilation of some of the study guides that he wrote for a university course that he developed at the request of an institution. I can't tell you which one. I don't know that he said which one, but the UFO for the 21st Century Mind. This is the new and expanded edition. And I remember that I didn't seek it out first pass because it had a relatively older copyright date, let's see, of 2014. And so this was 2023 when I was looking to find something that was broad and would give me the broad scope. And I was looking for the more current things because I had read Leslie's book, which was 2010 publication. And so I wanted something really more current. But then I stumbled upon that in 2022, he did an update to this. So not only does he talk about all the valuable background and the chapter, see, it's a lot thicker. It's a lot longer, more extensive book. But he goes into what are UFOs, what are the theories, into the ancient visitations, modernity, etc. UFO secrecy, those who fought it, digging deeper, the breakaway civilization. And then when he went back to do the revision, he actually wrote a new chapter, which would be, let's see, chapter 13, Ufology Amid the Revolution, 2013 to 2022. So he wrote a whole new chapter, and then he revised the conclusion. So that is what, to me, made this such a valuable book, because it was written for people who don't have a background. It was written for people who are just exploring. And so you get a glimpse of, well, what is this about, this experiencer thing? And he's got a chapter on that. And so it really helped me to understand the broad scope and just how terribly complicated this subject is and why people have so much trouble with it. What is this about? Why is it that when whistleblowers come out, they're so afraid? Why is it that they feel that they can't tell people what they know? Which is, as you and I have talked about, it's one of the most frustrating things about this whole topic. But to sort of understand why people can't tell, that's important to understand as well.
Yeah,
why the whistleblowers need protection, blah, 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 all that.
Just piggybacking on that a little bit, there's a great section at the end of Leslie Kane's book by Wendt and Duvall, who wrote one of the papers that we'll discuss about this later, about why a government might want to keep this secret, or why all governments might be incentivized to do that. I haven't seen a great piece of writing about why this might be so hard for all of us to accept. I think there are some good armchair theories, many of which have been discussed on this show, about just sort of being overwhelmed by the information or not wanting to have your worldview altered that much. But I would love to see somebody delve into the psychology of sort of a mass rejection. Something that comes up for me in these conversations is people will say, well, why haven't we seen more evidence over the years, or why haven't there been whistleblowers?
Right.
And the answer is there absolutely have. Like, a lot of people have come out and said these things. But what hasn't happened is we collectively have not updated our worldview to say, oh, they're probably right. So it's like what everybody's waiting on is like official confirmation. But people keep telling us that this is real, and then the official apparatus denies it or evades it. And until we get that official confirmation, some people are still going to reject this. So I would love to hear somebody explore the psychological question of why we're having such a hard time updating our worldview absent that official confirmation. But that's just something I would
share that. I share that 100%.
Yeah.
Because that really is what this is all about, is what is it that flips that switch within us?
Yeah.
How is it that we, after a whole lifetime of being fed the information that this is nothing but bunk, what causes us to say, what was that again?
Yeah.
What did you know? What did you hear? Who was it that said that? to
And
really
even
begin to
within,
peel away those layers of the onion to
Mhm.
try to figure out what is in there.
And what makes you start going on that journey? I'm very curious about that, because even in 2017, I didn't start, but then when I heard David Fravor explain it, that switch, as you described it, flipped for me, and I started caring. And I've seen that switch flip for other people, and I've seen people who have declined to flip the switch so far. And I'm fascinated by the question of how we flip this switch more broadly. And this thing that we're doing is part of that project. Okay, so I agree strongly with Leslie Kane. I was going to say my additional two are, I recommend J. Allen Hynek's The UFO Experience, Evidence Behind Close Encounters, Project Blue Book, and the Search for Answers. This is, I think there was a re-release in May of 2023. UFO Experience. It's not going to give you any recent information because J. Allen Hynek is like a product of the 50s and 60s, maybe a little bit 70s. I'm not exactly sure when this book was written, but this is going to cover like the Blue Book era, the early days of U.S. government and military investigating UFOs and navigating like public feedback about that. So what it'll give you is a deep grounding of the realness of this situation in that context of the like mid 20th century governmental exploration. Also, J. Allen Hynek is notable because he created this close encounters a framework, right? So close encounters of the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth kind, that derives from his work. And if anybody doesn't know who I'm talking about here, J. Allen Hynek was the scientist that the Air Force hired to be their sort of lead scientific investigator when they were publicly investigating UFOs. And then eventually they kind of shut that down. And in the wake of Blue Book getting shut down, Hynek came out and said this was largely a cover-up operation. Like they were trying to just pretend away all of these sightings, and some of them were, many were non-strange. They were regular things that we figured out, but a lot of them weren't. And the whole job of being their lead scientific investigator for him was mainly to debunk and explain away and sort of minimize the actually striking evidence. Also notable that J. Allen Hynek went to the United Nations and spoke about this, I believe, in the 70s. So there's stuff in this book that will leap off the page for you. One thing that really hit for me is that a lot of the cases that he checked out did have physical evidence. There was like indentations on the ground or burnt grass or broken tree branches, like real physical proof that something was there. And those were not small. I think he mentions there are like 1,400 cases like that in the body of research that he led. So that should be another bright blinking green arrow that this is real and people should look into it. And then my last book was going to be UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know by Robert Powell, friend of the show.
That's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you agree that's a good introductory work?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely.
I think he does a nice job of explaining kind of chunk by chunk some of the more interesting aspects of the phenomenon. Like, let's talk just about what it does with light, and let's talk about just how it affects gravity or time or something like that. And he sort of curates the sightings rather than giving you a flood of information. He talks about like clusters of sightings that make a certain point about one kind of aspect of the phenomenon. Like radio signals, for example, was a big highlight for me of this. Like, I learned from Powell that there are maybe 14 cases that he knew of in which there was some kind of radio exchange. So there are maybe 14 cases where a UFO communicated with a United States vessel. And that's, of course, not including international cases, but like a US plane sent out a radio signal and the UAP sent back some echo of that radio signal or a confirmation code or something, which is very weird and very interesting. So that's just one little detail that hopped off the page for me. And I also wanted to just say, we've spoken about this offline. Richard Dolan's other books are also useful. And when you're ready for that graduated level, UFOs and the National Security State, his 2-volume series.
Excellent
Work. Really
excellent.
Deep, overwhelming for a beginner. But if you're looking for the granular, like long scale picture, he does a great job of like rounding up all the sightings and decade by decade and really drilling in.
Yeah, I've read both of those thick volumes, and of course I didn't read them like every day for hours and hours, but just as a casual reader, let me say it that way. I think it took me a year to just sort of casually read through both of those volumes.
Mm.
But they are so dense and so full of case by case that you go, what is up with that? But I'd like to come back to the Robert Powell book
Great.
for just a moment, because what I think is so wonderful about his book is he's writing as a scientist and trying to deeply understand, some of the principles and apply the scientific principles to what he sees happening. And of course, this is one of the topics in modern day, I shouldn't say modern day, but current discussions, is that the scientific community, as particularly the academic scientific community, has not been engaged in this topic, and that there's largely because of the stigma associated with it, that you talk about a career killer, for a university scientist to engage with this. You're going to get laughed off of campus, and anybody who's going up for promotion and tenure, I mean, the stuff has to stand up to scrutiny. And there's such this huge stigma against it that it's hocus pocus, that there's nothing to it, that scientists have not been willing to risk their careers to investigate this topic. And so that is why we have this big vacuum, at least within the academic community. Now, I keep hearing murmurs that, within the research community associated with private institutes or
Venture
agencies
capital.
that have government contracts,
Mm.
that is not the case,
Mhm.
that is where the knowledge is obtained, refined, and perhaps reported on within those closely held circles, but again, not shared with the broader community.
Let's click into this point with our next topic. I'd like to do a list of scientific papers. Do you have any of those, or would you like me to just share my top 3?
I have not gathered any of those, Caleb. So
Okay.
why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Okay, great. Well, this dovetails nicely because there are some scientists out there kind of doing the hard work, drilling the hard boards. One of them, friend of the show, everybody will know, is Kevin Knuth, Dr. Kevin Knuth, who co-wrote the paper Estimating the Flight Characteristics of Anomalous Unidentified Aerial Vehicles. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I consider this a rock star paper. So you got Kevin Knuth, Robert M. Powell, and Peter A. Reali. I haven't spoken with Peter yet, and they collaborated on this paper. And what it basically does is say, all right, we're not going to try to solve the question of what these things are, where they come from, but what we can do is start with the reported behavior and estimate what that implies. So we can estimate the amount of velocity, the mass. We can estimate the amount of energy that we might be looking at. And so it takes a couple of case studies of specific observations, and it does math around these. So these guys are physicists. They're doing hard calculations about what might be going on if you just sort of take at face value the idea that you're looking at an object and it is doing X behavior. Then what does that mean about Y energy? Okay, I'm saying this a little strangely, but it's for me, it's a little over my head. I'm not math literate enough to understand the equations, but I really love looking at this paper and going through it, and I just feel sort of soothed and calmed by the fact that someone is out there taking this really seriously and applying their rigorous scientific understanding to the situation. So this is one that I share with people, and I recommend that everybody check out. Estimating Flight Characteristics of Anomalous Unidentified Aerial Vehicles. Another one that's really important, I think, is the scientific investigation of unidentified aerial phenomena. This is before we called them anomalous phenomena, using multimodal ground-based observatories. And this is sort of the cri de coeur, the statement of intent from the Galileo Institute. It's headed by Wes Waters, Dr. Wesley Waters, but cited on this paper, as on the title page of this paper, you will see like 24 scientists listed as contributors. So it's a real who's who of the scientific community. And it's kind of like a statement of intent to say, we are going to take this seriously, and here's how we're going to go about it. So it's not so much about findings. It's more about just like sources and methods, how we're going to approach this, how we can take it seriously, what kind of equipment we're using, where we're putting it, blah, blah, blah. It's, again, you know, it is dense because it is a scientific paper. These are, they're not written to be in the New York Times. They're written to go in like Science or Nature or whatever. But it is a statement of intent, and it is a statement of seriousness for the rest of the scientific community to understand, okay, no, real advanced scientists like Wes Waters and Avi Loeb are taking this very seriously. They're serious people. They work at serious institutions. They have tenure, which is why they can write things like this. And it's kind of an off to the races style paper. This is only from a few years ago, early 20s, I think. Yeah, May 13th, 2023 is when it was published, and it was accepted by the World Scientific Journal, a Journal of Astronomical Instrumentation, which is very important within the science world. It's like super important that you get into these serious journals, and the journals take their own credibility very seriously, which is why they don't publish a ton of stuff like this. And as a result, the UFO community has at times had to like start their own journals. Like Kevin Knuth has a journal called Entropy, or the Society for UAP Studies has a journal called Limina, which we recommend people check out. I would also put that on my list of websites. But finally, in papers, I would recommend what I mentioned earlier, which is Sovereignty and the UFO by Alexander Wendt and Raymond Duval. And this is a political science paper, so that makes it a little bit different, but it is still a serious academic paper, and it is asking seriously and academically the question of why governments would keep UFOs secret. And I'm hoping to speak with Dr. Wendt and maybe Dr. Duval at some point in the next couple months, but pending a podcast version of this conversation, you can watch Mr. Wendt's Soul video with the Soul Conference, or you could read their chapter in Leslie Kane's book, or you could read this paper, which is a little more serious. It's about 30 pages long, 27, and you'll get the gist of it from even just reading a few pages. But the basic argument that they propose is that governments don't want to acknowledge that UAP are really non-human technology, because that would fundamentally undermine the argument for a government's sovereignty, which is that it is the most powerful organization controlling the area it occupies. And that was me going off for a really long time. Do you want to bounce off that in any way, or take it in a different direction before we move to our next category?
Only to say that I think that this is an extremely important area to pay attention to, because this is where science builds upon the shoulders of the people before, which is that iterative research cycle of this is how science is refined. And this is a really important area. And I have not gone into that. And I'm so glad that you have, because this is really where things can happen in the academic spheres, which is, you know, where I have spent so much of my time. So thank you for that. I've been busy exploring, you know, the other turf, you know, what does common man, common woman want to know? Yeah, sort of thing.
Okay, cool. Well, just since you mentioned that and we're right on this topic, I'll naturally just shout out 3 institutions in this space that I think are extremely important. There's the
please do.
Great. Okay, there's the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which is SCU. Their website is explorescu.scu.org. The Galileo Project, which is set up at Harvard and has a bunch of bigwigs involved. They got a fair amount of money. They've got a couple sensor arrays, and they're taking a lot of heat in the area. I feel like they sort of have a tip of the spear position in that they can drive conversation. Like, news organizations feel comfortable reporting on a program that is not exactly sponsored by Harvard, but is set up loosely under the auspices of Harvard and with some Harvard researchers. And the Galileo Project's website is worth checking out, even if you just want to look at a long list of researchers who are currently taking this seriously. So when I started compiling a list of potential guests for my show, I went through their site and SCU's site and all the other science sites to see, you know, how many scientists are taking this seriously. And the answer is hundreds. It's hundreds of scientists who are taking this seriously, working on it very carefully, and exploring different aspects of the problem for their own research. And finally, I want to recommend SUAPS, the Society for UAP Studies, which is also an academic project, but a little more broadly than Galileo. They want to form some kind of like consensus of curiosity around exploring these topics, and they want to bring a real multidisciplinary approach to the subject. So they want to create a space for people to do work and teach courses from different angles of this topic, ranging from the social sciences through the hard sciences. And they have been publishing a journal that they call Limina. They have now published 2 editions of this, and it is currently all free online. So you can read every article in Limina on the Society for UAP Studies website, which is societyforuapstudies.org. Okay, and one other thing to say about this is that these organizations collect published papers as well. So all 3 of those orgs will have resources for you to check out. If you like reading scientific papers, you can, to the extent that there is a body of work here, you can find trailheads for that at all of those sites.
Interesting. So interesting. So I can't help but ask, where do you think the New Paradigm Institute fits into this sort of is that one of those things that you would, I mean, in my way of thinking, it's not like scholarly, it's more of a, what would you say, a way of helping people to discover what some of the themes and scientific threads are that underlie?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Okay, great question, first of all. And secondly, friends of the show, we've spoken to Jim Garrison in, I think, our 2nd season opens with talking to him, and he's the head of New Paradigm. Also, Danny Sheehan, people know, is out there, you know, chatting up a storm about the subject. I hope we'll speak to him eventually someday. I think what floats to mind for me is alt academia, like the idea that this is the New Paradigm aspires to have a sort of academic footprint. They want to generate masters and PhDs through their training programs, but they are, I think, a little bit outside the classic academic framework. So the SUAPs and SCU both have more of a focus on people who are like deeply enmeshed currently in the academic architecture of the world, and Galileo especially is like really picky about that. These people are all extremely serious, highly qualified individuals. New Paradigm has more of a sort of open heart, which I think is good.
Is good
because it means that they can run courses with people like Bertie Jaworski, who are going to teach stuff that is a little more high woo. And I took her course on remote viewing and communication.
Oh, really?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
But not exactly classic academic material. So New Paradigm Institute, I think the plus there is that they are much more open to kind of airy-fairy woo ideas, like much less demonstrated techniques and avenues of inquiry. They're out on the edge, and that's important. I would say the drawback of that approach is that they lack the credibility of these more serious institutions. And I think within the scientific community, I can't really speak for them, but I sense as a moderator some tension between the areas of academic inquiry that are more open to unusual realms of exploration, and the areas of the academic community that are really trying to focus on brass tacks, like things that we know and can adopt within our own paradigm, so to speak. So the New Paradigm is a little farther out there, and they're down the bunny hole a little bit more. The danger academically from just like a careful thinking perspective is, I think that you can get sort of overly credible. Maybe you can get overly credulous. Rather, you can maybe open up to some ideas that might be a little wishy-washy, and if you're not applying rigorous standards, you could get lost, or you could start kind of chasing your own tail intellectually. That's possible. But on the other hand, if you rule out those areas of exploration entirely, you're going to probably miss some aspect of reality. And I would say that is the problem with mainstream science in a very big way. So part of the reason that there's a tension between the harder sort of nuts and bolts scientific community and the like spiritual and woo scientific community is that the nuts and bolts people have had a hard enough time getting credibility with the rest of the scientific institution that doesn't even think the nuts and bolts are worth investigating. So then they turn around and they say, well, I can't go there with the woo stuff because I already can barely get funding for my nuts and bolts stuff. And that happens all over the UAP community. Like I had a great conversation with somebody recently where they said, look, I'm very interested in the experiencer stuff, but please don't talk to me about the cover-up stuff, because that's so conspiratorial that it makes my stuff, which is already far out there, seem even crazier by association. So that is a challenge within the UFO world. Is it can't just be, oh, everything is probably true. You know, you have to take these things piece by piece. But that's one of the reasons that doing this project of conversational approach to it seems to make sense to me. Getting each perspective individually from people who are engaged in these various projects. Sorry for that long sidewalk, but I think you were right to bring them up.
Okay, well, I think that, you know, when I think about scientific research, it's one of those areas in which you want control over what it is you're studying, which is an utter paradox when it comes to ufology. Okay, so, you know, if you're doing bench research and you are dealing with chemicals or some sort of, like, say you're looking at protozoa or something, you have control over each test tube, each petri dish, whatever it is that you're working with. The problem is inherent with ufology is that you have no control over it at all. And so it creates this sort of paradox for scientists, I think, because there is no such thing as a controlled experiment, is there? I'd love to have someone contradict that statement, you know, that it seems as though that's just an inherent paradox that,
well, if
I don't know how scientists are going to overcome that.
If the summoning signal thing is real, that Skywatcher has been experimenting with, which is they send up like a signal of some kind and they get some kind of response, that's potentially a controlled experiment that you could run. But or some version, it gets you closer to the idea of control. And you can control apparatus and instrumentation, which is, I think, what Wes Waters is driving at in his paper about how to do this rigorously. And that's also going to come up in the NASA report, which I'd like to mention in a little bit. But let's move to another category here, since we just spent a long time on science. I would love to explore documentaries. Would you like to talk about your favorite documentaries?
Sure, we could do that. I think that a lot of people would probably say James Fox's The Phenomenon is going to be one of the best ones for a newcomer to the topic to view, because it, again, it provides an overview, a lot of different talking heads from various walks of life talking about it. And you certainly see some of the people who have done, you know, the work of coming out with the David Fravor, the Chris Mellon is highlighted in there, as is Lou Elizondo. You know, some of those key figures who have been extremely important in, say, the 2017 New York Times article, and then the later articles that featured Ryan Graves. So I think that would be one that I would recommend to someone who's just beginning to explore the topic, who would like to know more.
I would agree with that. That was on my list of 3. I think you have to rent it somewhere kind of funny, but again, it's called The Phenomenon by James Fox.
I think you can get to it on YouTube. I think if you just do a search for it on YouTube, you'll find it. Great.
I was also going to recommend UFOs Investigating the Unknown, which is Leslie Kane's series. It was sponsored by, it was initially going to be a CNN documentary, and then CNN shuffled their deck and it became a National Geographic, I think, doc. But anyway, the main point is that you can find it on Hulu, and there are 2 seasons now. And as Ms. Kane said to us in our interview, this is a really great place to start. And it's
It
intentionally
is.
designed to be an introductory documentary series for people who don't know anything about the topic. So that one, again, is called UFOs Investigating the Unknown.
But those are lovely because each episode is less than an hour, maybe like 50 minutes or so.
Mm,
And then you can also find a version that puts them together in like a mega version.
okay. Yeah.
And you can get to all of them or from season one, all put together. I think I've seen. Very nicely done. I give high marks to that, and would definitely have listed that one next if you hadn't. So we're in total agreement on that one.
Okay, cool. Do you have another one on your list? I only have one more here.
I think that one of the things I want to be sure to talk about is the fact that there are some new ones that are coming out that we need to be watching for.
Okay.
The age of disclosure, that sort of thing.
Yeah, age of disclosure is clearly the thing that's on the horizon that is the most important for UFO documentary world.
But did you have another one, Caleb, that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I would mention Netflix Encounters. This is a short series. It's only 4 episodes. And
haven't seen that.
Oh, cool.
What can you tell me about it?
It takes kind of 4 big avenues in with a little bit of a geographical specialization. So one of the episodes is almost entirely about Wales, for example, like Wales as in the UK nation state independent sort of semi-autonomous region. And there's a lot of really interesting information in here in the form of human stories, like direct encounters. There are some of the scientists that we've talked about here, like Dr. Knuth pops up to make some statements, and John Mack gets mentioned. The school incident in Zimbabwe gets an episode, and we get to talk to the students as they are today, looking back on their experience, which is pretty significant. So, and this one's also got like kind of a light footprint, so I appreciate that. It's very well produced, but it's not going to take you a million hours. A problem in the UFO documentary space is that it can be really sort of mysterious and a little bit overhyped, frankly. Like a lot of who knows if this space in the ocean is a thing, like it doesn't take itself as seriously as I would like it to sometimes, this like field. And I think Encounters does a good job of taking it pretty seriously and giving us as much serious information as it can, while also holding space for the weirdness. And like there are some stories in the Whales episode that are very, very strange about like men in black or like giant creatures, and but they're not done with the sort of like Ancient Aliens, History Channel, grainy kind of, I don't know, prurience. This is like a harder core and more real feeling. And as a way to experience people's emotional reaction to the subject, I think it's a really good way to get a feeling for what it's like for people to have seen these things and encountered some of these beings, and it gives that a sense of realness. That's one step closer to the subject from like Project Blue Book, which is, it's really cool to know what it felt like to investigate these things, but it's a different kind of feeling to engage with humans who have personally encountered these strange things. So it's called Encounters for that reason.
Talk about a rapid shift in one's paradigm. I mean, people who are just going about living their lives with the common perception that there's nothing to this whole thing, and then to be confronted by something that is weird and strange, and probably spend years after trying to make sense of what was that. Totally.
And thinking about that psychology and how we can support these people is pretty important too. So it's important to hear their stories directly and get a little closer to that. And as you said, the one on the horizon, which who knows, maybe will have come out by the time this airs. The Age of Disclosure is a big documentary that has a lot of serious interviews with serious people, and we're all hoping in the UFO community that this will make waves, but certainly it's going to be required viewing to people who are just getting started within the range of 2025.
Yeah. And that brings up this notion that who is really the audience for these things.
Mm,
So many people who are deeply embedded in this topic and, read and talk about it every day become very disappointed when some of these things come out. Well, there's nothing new here, but that isn't the point. And I think I heard Leslie Kane say, maybe it was even on her interview with you, in which she talked about the fact that, to educate more and more people, to reach more and more people who have not been exposed to this and who can come to understand that there really is something real about all of this, is a goal that we have to have as a community, because that's where that's how we go about achieving a common understanding within a society about any topic. And when it comes to this one, even more strange. How do you get to the point where you don't have to worry about saying to somebody, I've been reading books about this topic?
yeah.
There are some people you can feel comfortable saying that to, but can you say it to just anyone?
No.
Most
Yeah.
people say no, that they don't want anybody to know that they are exploring this topic for fear of what that person will think of them. So
Yeah.
what will dad say, that kind of
Right.
thing.
So that is a big part of our project here, is just by conversating about it, we can help open the aperture, but also giving people trailheads to explore themselves and to share with people who are just getting started or who are skeptical about that subject, which is really important. And I'm hoping Age of Disclosure will help with that. Do want a side note that it's been a long time since it debuted at the Austin South by Southwest Festival.
Yes, it has been a
They
while now.
still, as far as I can tell, they don't have distribution, which is slightly weird and unfortunate. And I think that probably happened. It looks like something like that happened with James Fox's documentaries as well. They're in weird places. They're hard to find, and it's a little hard for independent filmmakers to sell these things, which sort of suggests that there's also a stigma within the ranks of some of
Yeah.
these mega media companies, because often when a movie is very buzzy, it'll get bought right away at a festival. It'll have distribution shortly after debuting. People, sorry, outside the industry of film, people probably don't know this, but often films will get produced before they are sold to large distributors, and then those distributors will either put them in movie theaters or put them on streaming platforms, and that is the last mile of a film's journey. It can be produced and sitting on a shelf for months or even years before a distributor picks it up and agrees to actually host it on a platform, sell it, rent it, whatever. So Age of Disclosure, as we're speaking in May of 2025, is still in limbo and doesn't have that kind of distribution. I'm sure they're holding out for something good like Netflix or Amazon. Maybe they're trying to get a theatrical run and nobody's given them that so far. I don't know exactly what the holdup is, but I find that slightly discouraging and maybe moderately suspicious. I'm not a huge cover up guy, but
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd like to think that it has more to do with return on investment,
yeah,
than it does with cover up. Maybe that's my naivete showing, but that's what I'd like to think, that it's in limbo, waiting for maximum ROI to kick in. But
yeah.
we'll
No,
see.
I think that's a pretty good guess. Let's move on to another category. I've got channels and podcasts next.
Okay, wow, that's a big one, because that's where a lot of people find their first exposure to this. And there are so many out there. I have a very long list, and I'm sure it doesn't cover everybody. Wow, I don't even know where do we begin tackling
Okay,
that
I'll
very
shoot
long
my
list.
three just kind of breezily. I'll say That UFO Podcast, Need to Know, and UAP Studies Podcast. There are a million in this space, but I'll say quickly why I like these. I like That UFO Podcast because Andy McGrillen is deeply versed in the subject, a good conversationalist, and has great contacts throughout the UFO world. So he has good people and he asks good questions and he puts out a lot of stuff. So that's a great start. I had Andy as my second guest on this show, and I was like honored to meet him at the time because he's been doing this for 4 years, and it was very, very gracious of him to speak with me. So I'm a big fan. Need to Know, I also think, is like canon. Like, this is Ross Coulthart and Bryce Zabel's podcast.
Yes,
and these guys are at the top level of the channel and podcast game. So
yeah, they are on my short list as well.
Okay, cool. And they're sort of a slower release schedule. They don't do every week or
Mhm.
necessarily even every month, but when they do come out, I always listen. It's
Always worth it. Always worth the time.
yeah, and Ross's show also on this point, Reality Check. Okay.
Yes, Reality Check. There you
Also
go.
cool, and also does a great job of talking to the most important people in the space. Ross deserves a lot of credit for leading the charge here, but just in
Agreed.
podcast form, Need to Know is a good way to keep up on what he's doing. If you
Yeah.
want to watch something on YouTube, watch Reality Check. And finally, UAP Studies podcast. I just think they have a great title, and I think they have a great angle, which is academic, basically. Like, let's come at this a little more rigorously and from within the setting of college and university research. So that one, I don't know all the hosts' names, but we're friends of the show with Dr. Michael Glosson, who also runs the Anomalous Review podcast for the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. So both of those, UAP Studies podcast and Anomalous Review, take a little bit more of an academic approach, and they both have really good guests. So recommend both of those.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that my number, probably the one that I'm going to look at the moment I see it pop up on my feed, is anything that features Richard Dolan. The Richard Dolan Show, the Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure Show. I really appreciate the way he thinks about things, and he has this really long historical perspective, because he's been at this for a very long time. Doesn't jump to conclusions, tries to never make wild statements about anything, just always very measured, and a sort of a scholarly approach to, what do you suppose that is about, kind of thing. And so, like I said, anytime I see any of his shows popping up on my feed, I'm going to look at them as soon as I can. Another one I have a lot of respect for is Jesse Michaels. He usually, his shows are quite long. Some of them go as long as 2-3 hours. I think his latest one was almost 4, where he did that remarkable interview with the gentleman who had been part of JFK's advisory team. What is his name?
Jesse's show is called American Alchemy, by the way.
Yes, and always, I think, a very thoughtful approach, and certainly not just superficial material. And
and
so,
kind of relating to that point we made about Leslie Kane's work on his book, Jesse is kind of creating primary source documents by doing these long interviews, because he's getting to, because he's big enough, he's got hundreds of thousands of followers, he can get to people at the top of the field. Like, he has a great interview with David Grush, for example, right after Grush's hearing.
Yes, he did.
And he's talked to physicists and like serious government guys, and he does a really good job of giving them, as you said, enough time to really fully explore the topic, and then those things become primary source documents, because other shows and people writing articles can reference these long interviews as places where important statements got made. So I respect that a lot. And you and I have been talking about the format question of like whether to go long, whether to go short. Sometimes long is appealing, but there is also sort of a high barrier to entry for long. So that is tough, but I agree with you. Short list, American Alchemy, especially if you've got it in you to watch a couple hours of one person, just turn it on 2x and let it run in the background. It's worth checking some of those out.
I think so. And the other one I want to give a shout out to is Beyond Strangeness. Doesn't come out very often, but I think is always very sharply focused on a particular topic. And one that comes to mind that really I found very compelling was an episode that dealt with the whole apparatus of secrecy, the levels of secrecy, all the various agencies that are involved with intelligence in the United States government. And I have to say that particular episode stands out in my mind because it gave me such an appreciation and understanding for the intelligence gathering agencies and what kinds of I don't know if the right word is rules, but the kinds of ethics that are involved, and the importance of the non-disclosure agreements and the penalties for violation of those agreements, that to me, that episode just really hit home with me to help me understand why people feel so reluctant at high levels of government to talk about these things.
And so again, that pod is Beyond Strangeness.
Beyond Strangeness. The
the
first name of
specific
the person who does that is Jason,
Okay.
but I've never figured out what his last name is.
Okay. All right. That's a good pod roundup. As we move into our closing segment here, I've got a few more categories I'd love to cover, but maybe we can do this a little bit more in a lightning round fashion. Does that sound okay to you?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So first, let's do.
Hoping that my brain is lightning.
Well, pauses are okay. Let's start with, since we're on podcasts and channels, specific interview episodes that you particularly liked. Like, do you want to call out this Beyond Strangeness particular
Yes,
episode?
I do. Yes, I do. And another one I want to call out is Richard Dolan's top 10 facts about UFOs, which to me as a beginner was so helpful because he just went through the list and with bullet points on the screen, just like a college professor, so that I could take it in and really get it. What are the top 10 things that you need to know about UFOs? It was like sitting in a college classroom, very, very helpful.
Cool. And on the Beyond front, I'm looking at this episode now. I think it was called "How UFO Gatekeepers Keep U.S. Citizens in the Dark About the Truth." And
that's correct.
Okay, great. So this is about why UFO whistleblowers can't just tell us everything. There's very important context there. So that, and then you said Richard Dolan's top 10 facts about UFOs.
Yes.
Okay. And did you have another specific episode to recommend?
Oh, let's see. 10 key facts about UAP is
Okay.
the title of that. I just pulled it up.
Thank you.
Yes, I think another one that I want to mention here is one titled "More Things in Heaven and Earth."
Ooh, nice.
And it was from a UFO UAP teach-in with Janie Sheehan. It was done by the New Paradigm Institute
and also Visible College. A friend of the show org, Visible College.
That's good.
I think they were collaborating with the New Paradigm there, and they were also invited by the Yale UAP Society. I was going to mention this in conference presentations. Which of the more things in heaven and earth speeches were you interested in? Because I think they called their whole event that, but then multiple people spoke. So which one were you going to recommend?
I was going to recommend the intro that Danny gave.
Danny Sheehan
gave.
Cool.
And that was actually the title of it.
Okay, cool. I was going to recommend Kevin Knuth's.
Yes, he spoke at that.
Yeah,
yes.
And it's also
quite
just
good.
Called More Things in Heaven and Earth. But he's giving a presentation on the science and stuff. I actually haven't watched Danny's, so thank you for that recommendation. Okay, so that's a good 3 episodes. Mine are a little weirder. I'll go 3 strange episode pitches. One, I think you should watch Grush on Rogan. It's a couple hours long. You can listen to it as well. Just kind of give you a deeper sense of the guy. Something Rogan does really well is just like give you this feeling that you're hanging out with somebody for a sustained period of time, which can help you get a sense of their realness. And that happens across the spectrum of guests, from politicians to scientists to, in Grush's case, the military. And I think it's worth doing just to get a sense of David Grush as a person. But there will also be some aha moments for you if you're not familiar with his claims. And likewise, the Grush American Alchemy episode is worth checking out if you're looking for more context and more of like Grush's personal theories on the situation, which are not the kind of thing he would share with Congress.
Yes, it was much more informal and very, very easy listening.
Yeah, I agree. It's another thing that's just kind of fun and gives you a sense of him as a person. And then I'm going to go even weirder for the other 2. One is Kelly Chase has since rebranded her show from the UFO Rabbit Hole to Cosmosis. But if you go all the way back to the very beginning of UFO Rabbit Hole, what you'll get from Ms. Chase is a really nice just introduction to the subject and like a carefully phrased tiptoe in And if you're the kind of person
Wow.
who's like thinking carefully and sort of nervous about approaching this subject, I think you will vibe with her, because that seems to me to be how she approached the subject. Like, I am a smart person who thinks carefully about the world, but this seems real to me, and this is all coded as crazy. So how am I
Oh,
supposed
I
to
love
approach it?
this.
Yeah,
I love
it's
this.
interesting.
Yeah.
I look forward to speaking with Kelly someday. I think she's a careful thinker. Sometimes I think she's so careful that it's like she almost assiduously avoids reaching conclusions. But I think especially when you're beginning your journey, it's really helpful to have that energy and to connect with her careful thinking and her way of seeing the subject. So maybe go all the way back to the very beginning of UFO Rabbit Hole and listen to that first episode, and it might help you find your way in. And then the total big swing with my last episode recommendation is Joe McMoneagle on Sean Ryan's show. It is a 6 hour and 13-minute podcast
Wow.
/ YouTube episode. So way too long for most people to watch. But if you sit through this, or even if you get the highlights and use the time code to skip to certain bits, I think you will come away thinking a bunch of supernatural stuff that I used to think was crazy might be real. And
wow, something good to look at if you have a bad case of the flu or something, and you're just sitting around all day.
Absolutely. If you got 6 hours, maybe you're taking a long flight or
There
a
you
train
go.
ride or something, might be worth checking out. And this is a little bit to the side of the UFO UAP world, but there is a bunch of supernatural stuff that kind of butts up against UAP, and this is a good way into that. It's not exactly like introductory in the sense of like a scientist introducing you to this carefully, but it's introductory in that it's one person's experiences over the course of his lifetime. And for me, at least, it was pretty compelling. And I think it's hard to look at a bunch of the things that Joe McMoneagle experienced and say, well, this is all just a silly coincidence. He had near-death experiences. He had some out-of-body experiences. He had some precognition experiences during wartime. And then he became a remote viewer and remote viewed some stuff really effectively. And I think if you want to just hand wave that all away, you can. But honestly, I think you're probably kind of kidding yourself at this point. I think a lot of people are still trying to kid themselves that there's nothing to this. But I think there's a very big difference between rigorously scientifically explaining how something can be true and that thing not existing. So like just the fact that we don't have a detailed scientific description of why remote viewing is real doesn't mean that it's not real. And this is a good place to explore that playground. Doesn't specifically relate to UFOs, but it touches a lot of stuff adjacent to the topic.
Well, that's a really good one, Caleb. You know,
Thank you.
I think one place we haven't gone during this discussion is there's any kind of mention of the submerged ones, the USOs.
Oh yeah.
And a really good one, if you want an introduction to that topic, is to listen to Tim Gallaudet on the Emerged podcast.
Oh, cool.
And
which was
it's called
Admiral's
Admiral's Hunt for UFO Goes Underwater. And it was done by Merged back in September of 23. Ryan Graves doesn't do much with that Merged anymore. I'm not sure that he even considers it active, but I always enjoy listening to him because I think that he has such a balanced view, and he's been so concerned about air safety that that I just think his heart's in the right place. But this was a very interesting podcast, and I think that Tim Gallaudet has such a wonderful style that you could just listen to him all day. And it isn't that long, but it really gives you an exposure to what this world of these submerged underwater type UFOs is about.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you for that. I had a second category here that was called conference presentations, and I think we will keep that separate on our website for the purposes of research. But here it kind of blends into what we've been saying. So I just want to mention a couple more. One is Dr. Beatrice Villarreal's quote, Civilian Astronomer's Guide to UAP Research, which was her recent Soul presentation, Soul Foundation talk. Another is Dr. Kevin Knuth's More Things in Heaven and Earth at the Yale Teach-In. And finally, this one has kind of tough audio, but he's a friend of the show and he founded Visible College. Dr. Stephen Brown's talk that he gave at his school, Ohio State University, I believe, quote, "It's irrational to ignore UFOs," end quote, is the title of that presentation. And he is by trade an epistemologist. So it's like a logical, philosophical argument for why it's irrational to ignore UFOs. And he basically makes the case that you can't look at all the stuff going on and say there's just nothing to see here. We also can't necessarily conclude that everything we're hearing is real or accurate, but in the face of the testimony and the actions by Congress, it would be strange to ignore the idea that UFOs might be non-human technology. And he makes this case quite forcefully and quite thoughtfully over the course of about an hour and a half with some visual aids. So again, the audio is a little scratchy, but that one is worth listening to because it's very thoughtful. He's very smart. I'm a big fan of Dr. Stephen Brown.
Very cool. Well, I don't know why, but what you're talking about that made me think of an old one that was done back in '97. It was an old recording that was resurrected and presented by Mystery Wire in 2020. It was an interview with Philip Corso. The complete interview with him back in 1997, in which he's talking about, he was the guy who claimed that during the Eisenhower administration, was releasing some of these artifacts from crashed vehicles to hand over to defense contractors to see what kind of technology they could develop as a result of being exposed to these. And really, really interesting. I mean, I think there again, we seem to have these waves of openness to disclosure that happen over long periods of time. And I think that those late 90s was a period of time in which there was this idea that it was going to be okay to disclose some of these things, and that it was under that sort of thinking was why Philip Corso wrote his book, The Day After Roswell. And of course, there were a lot of people who said, oh, there was nothing to that he made a lot of misstatements. But I've also heard some scholars claim that basically what he was saying had a lot of truth to it, even though he may have, as an older person, made a few mistakes about some of the details. So.
That's a really good one, and that should also be on people's short lists. It shouldn't be the first book you read about UFOs,
no.
But if you're in a rhythm of reading some UFO books, definitely read The Day After Roswell. Whether or not it's true, you can figure that out for yourself, but it's an important document in the history of UFO claims.
Yeah,
and he really
that
was.
Book blew me away. The last, I don't know if it's the last chapter or the second to last. Anyway, it's a chapter about the Star Wars initiative under Reagan. And really fascinating to get his take on why that whole politic behind he and Gorbachev trying to, break down the society, break down that Berlin Wall, break down, and why they decided to begin collaborating. And people who had been bitter enemies in the past were now collaborating in space, and that they were doing it, according to Corso, in pursuit of this and defense against this common enemy, the alien, which was totally new thought at that period of time.
It's a very big claim, and sort of shocking that he survived to make it. But if this stuff is real, then maybe the powers that be just decided that people wouldn't believe him, and most people didn't. So
there you go.
It's still worth checking out. He really was a figure in the Eisenhower administration, and he did hold high positions in one White House and then over at the Pentagon. Like he served in roles that could plausibly have supported the stories that he then told later in life.
Yes.
Let's do hearings, reports, documents, and we'll wrap up with news segments. So 4 more sections. 1, hearings. I think we both agree Grush Fravor Graves is the gold star.
Top notch.
That's the one. If you watch no other hearings, you really should watch that. It's several hours long. But even if you only engaged with the written opening statements of Fravor, Grush, and Graves, you get a lot of the big picture of that hearing.
Yes, for sure.
And you can also find the 5-minute opening statements that they all make verbally to Congress. Those are watchable sound bites. You could even hop around in the whole big thing and just kind of see what's happening to get a sense of it. But as a UFO event in Congress, it's the most important thing in most of our lifetimes that has happened. And a lot of stunning claims get made by very serious people. Those guys are all very serious people.
Yes.
So strongly recommend that. Then I'm going to also say, the obvious follow-up to that is Elizondo et al. From, I believe, 2024. Michael Gold is there from NASA. Michael Schellenberger is there from Independent Journalism. And Tim Gallaudet, retired Rear Admiral. So that one is pretty serious, and there's some interesting stuff. There's a lot of, I can't talk about it in a public session, which annoys people, and understandably so. And this one is, it's a little more diffuse, and the claims are sort of less striking. One important moment is somebody asks, what do you guys think this is? And Gallaudet says, basically, I think this is non-human intelligence. And Lou says ditto. And, the statements are not as forceful as you would maybe like, but still, the headline out of that is former Rear Admiral tells Congress, I think these are non-human technologies. So there's something to that, and it's worth watching. And then finally, the least interesting, but still relevant, is in 2022, these guys, Bray and Moultrie, spoke to government. Let me see. Scott Bray, then the Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, and Ronald Moultrie, who was then the DoD Undersecretary for Intelligence. They brought some bad video presentations, and they spoke to Congress, and they answered questions. And the most important thing that comes out of this is that they pin them down. Some congressmen pin these guys down on the fact that UFOs are physical objects, or some UFOs are physical objects. So there's this exchange where Congressman Krishnamurti says, okay, one of the big questions I have is, when we say probably, do we mean that we can't conclusively say they are? And Scott Bray eventually says, I can say with certainty that a number of these are physical objects, and that comes from multiple radars and blah blah blah. So that's the only real important thing, I think, that comes out of that. But that hearing in 2022 was the first time there had been a hearing in Congress since like the 60s, I think. So it was a good
revolutionary for a time, no doubt about it. And if it hadn't been for Chris Mellon, who convinced Lou Elizondo to get a little bit more public, and which led to the Leslie Kean article in 2017, I don't know that we'd be hearing any of this right now.
Yeah, Chris Mellon, fascinating figure. I would love to talk to him. Absent that, I would recommend that people go listen to the Anomalous Review podcast with friend of the show, Michael Glosson, interviewing Chris Mellon. I don't know how he got him to talk to him. I guess because he works with SCU. But that's a good conversation, and it's early on in the podcast. So Christopher Mellon also writes at the Debrief, and you can read his articles, but boy, the guy's got a long wind. So you have to have some patience to read all the way through a Christopher Mellon article. Reports, I want to shout out the NICAP UFO evidence report. This was a group of, this was an independent group from the 60s and 70s, the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena. They released this report called The UFO Evidence in 1964. This is a great PDF for people to scroll through. It's 388 pages. And the big takeaway is going to be a lot of listed sightings with characteristics like height and velocity, and details like date and location and the name and rank of the person who saw this object. There's a lot of Air Force sighting. There are a lot of military and law enforcement sightings. So this is a document that I put in front of people to just massage them into this idea that this is a real thing that people have been really encountering for a really long time. And I think it's also specifically helpful to see people's specific descriptions of these things, like a perfectly round disc, a light source approached the plane, speeding lights, up, down, horizontally, 2 blue-white light sources, rectangles, triangles, blah, blah, blah. There's something about seeing the details that makes it harder to just wave it all away as everybody was confused. Well, they're all seeing something, and they're all seeing specific things. So that leads you further down the line of inquiry to get to this stuff is real. Similarly, Project Blue Book's Special Report 14 is a really important document. This one's another 300-page report. I believe it was put together for them by the Battelle Institute. The visuals are a little less great. There's some really boring charts in there, but there are also some interesting like hand sketches of things that people saw. And again, this is an intriguing sort of historic record because this is from 55, the 5th of May, 1955. And in the 50s and 60s, you get this sense that people were taking this more seriously. There was much more public conversation about it.
Yes.
And so that's an important thing for people in the 2020s to realize that this was taken very seriously. And there was a time where there was a lot of public inquiry going on around it. And then that went away for not very good reasons. But I think people tend to come into this subject thinking, the fact that I haven't heard anything about it suggests that there's nothing there. So it's important to get back into the historical record and realize, oh no, this stuff has been happening for a really long time. And it's also important to contextualize that these objects have been appearing since way before we could have credibly had that kind of hyper advanced technology, unlike today.
Absolutely. It really does help you understand that this goes back so far that there has to be something to it. And along the same line of reports that are of historical significance, I think we have to mention the Cometa report that Leslie Kane was forwarded, done by, what was the group?
Japan.
Oh, shucks.
It's
GNAC, is that the name of it?
I actually don't know how to pronounce it, but it's the French agency. It's either Japan or Gaipan.
I think you're right about that. And Leslie was forwarded an English translation of it back in like 1999 or something. And she broke a story on that in the early 2000, I think. And certainly was one of the things that really opened her eyes to the whole topic. And I think it was significant in that their final conclusion was that they felt that the alien hypothesis was one that needed to be taken seriously.
Yeah, very.
This is the French government speaking, everyone, not just a bunch of people sitting out on a hillside with over a case of beer. This is real stuff.
Yeah, maybe it was. I think maybe to draw a little distinction, it may not have been a government report. The Cometa report was published by a French association called Cometa, the Comité d'études approfondies.
So they were not sponsored by the French government?
It says on their Wikipedia
page
that they were a nonprofit association. And then the GIPAN which is also an acronym, GEIPAN, was a unit of the French space agency CNES. So they're somewhere between a nonprofit and a government agency. And GIPAN published this Cometa report in one of their archives, in one of GIPAN's archives. So this is not exactly like the French government looked into it and published this, but it is certainly government adjacent, and it was chaired by a retired French Air Force general, the Cometa committee anyway. So it's government overlap. And likewise, that reminds me.
Thank you for keeping us honest on that. I want to be sure that we're clear and got the facts straight.
The ins and outs are inscrutable to me, but I'm very curious. And that points me to the one other I wanted to mention, which is similarly sort of straddling worlds. The NASA report from 2023, which is an independent study report on unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's really good. It's got, I don't know, maybe 20 scientists who got together to write this report. People in the press kind of tried to categorize it as if this were an analysis of UAP data and a conclusion about its origin, which it is not at all. This report is basically an exploration of what it would look like if NASA were to investigate UAP. And it is a proposal of like means and methods to analyze UAP data. They look at like one case and propose an alternate explanation, but it's not a broad debunking exercise. And to the extent they reach a conclusion, they say, we don't have proof yet that these things are extraterrestrial. I think it would go as far as to say, we don't have any reason to think that they are, but it likewise pushes from the other direction and says, it's reasonable to conduct research and investigate these phenomena in the same way that it's reasonable to conduct SETI and look for technosignatures on other planets. It's reasonable to look for technosignatures in the solar system, and it's reasonable to look for them around Earth. And they mention in this report that it was hard for them even to say this much. So it's like very difficult within especially government scientific apparatus to even approach this subject. And for that reason, this report deserves a lot of credit, because the project of creating it is basically a statement that it is worth thinking about this, and then a proposal of some specific ways in which we could.
That is really important. And wow, have I ever learned a lot from this discussion?
Well, that's great. The last two of our categories are documents and news segments. We'll end with news segments because people can run out and watch some. I'll just say in the documents space, which is a bit of a catch-all for me, there are some things that sort of fall between the cracks here, and a few of them are like military memos or like notes from an important meeting, say. And so my three document recommendations are the Twining memo, in which Admiral Twining says the UFO phenomenon is real and not visionary and fictitious, and the Wilson Davis memo, in which Eric Davis talked to Admiral Wilson, and Wilson basically explains that there's a secret reverse engineering program that he's going to have to then deny exists in public, which Wilson has gone on to deny, but Davis has not commented on that denial. And per friend of the show, Leslie Kane, this is an authentic document. So the Wilson Davis memo is worth reading because it basically lays out something very similar to David Grush's claims before Grush made them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And finally, I like this little article from the Worcester newspaper in the 60s. I would classify it as a document that has a couple quotes from the first head of the CIA, in which he says, UFOs basically, they are intelligently controlled, and they couldn't possibly be us, and they couldn't possibly be Russia. So that leaves nothing other than non-human intelligence. This is from the first director of the CIA, who was intimately involved with the military and intelligence agencies from the very beginning of the CIA's life and at the end of World War II. So if anybody would have known, it would have been that guy. So I recommend that people look at that article and just internalize that statement. Do you have any documents that you'd like to share before we go out with news segments as our final category?
I really don't have anything to add other than I just had this funny visual flash when you were talking about the news stories of the headline from back in, 1947, when the Roswell newspaper came up with this headline about that a flying saucer had been found, and within a matter of days, that story had totally changed.
Whoops,
that newspaper
says Air Force
headlines still exist.
Yeah, critical. People should read the books about Roswell that are not on the top of my brain right now, but we'll put them in our library list, because that is another area that I assumed was silly, walking into the UFO subject. And now I think it's probably not silly, and there's probably something to that, but I'm not well versed.
No, I think that people understood. There seemed to be this recognition that this was a dangerous topic, and that this is why people backed away from it. That figures in authority decided that it was not a good idea for the common person to probe around in this area for whatever reason. They really haven't ever explained that to us, why they think we should not know.
Well, so on credible information, let's finish with the exploration of this topic by serious news organizations in the contemporary era. I've got the 60 Minutes piece from, I think, 2023, where they speak with Fravor and Dietrich.
Yes.
And Ryan Graves. And there are two segments of this. There's a 13-minute segment and then one that's like a little under 7 minutes. And this is another thing that I've shared with a bunch of friends as just an introductory. Get to know this topic, get to understand that it's real, and get to watch serious orgs taking it seriously, like 60 Minutes. I think it actually might be the best one so far from a major.
That was a really hard one to top. Now, there was another interesting, if not as notable as that, but still perhaps worth taking a look at, was this CNN story that came out right after the New York Times article. Ex-UFO program chief says we may not be alone. And it's was done on December 19th, so 2 days after that story broke, and it was an interview with Lou Elizondo.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you. That's news to me. I didn't know that was out there. And I saw some others on your list that were new to me as well, like interviews that I hadn't seen before. The only other things I had here were the David Grush interview with Ross Coulthart is sort of like seminally significant.
Yes, and so many people point to that one as being a key video that like a must see, and I agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add to that the more recent one, the Jake Barber interview with Ross Coulthart is great. And I would specifically steer people toward the long form version of this interview, not
I would as
the
well.
cut for TV. And I don't know if there's such a version of the Grush interview, but I would love to see them release it because I just think these longer interviews are better.
Well, they certainly give a more full-blown, a better rounded view of the individual who's being interviewed. Much less two-dimensional, a real human being here. And I enjoy stories like that.
Yeah. I also think it helps when you take out the production elements of the like sound stings and the audio and video effects. Like all that stuff makes it actually seem less real. I know when they're going for their like 42-minute package, they want to make it seem exciting, but it's deleterious of the sort of like veracity effect. I did not need that many syllables to say it makes it look less real. And I think the full interviews are just better for that reason. And I even like this. I'm glad that we live in an era of podcasts and longer form interviews in general on any topic. I think usually people have better, more nuanced things to say in an hour, 47-minute conversation than in a like 3-minute hit spot on Name Your News program. So to that point, we've been kind of going for a long time. I'm sorry that I took so much of your time today, but I'm so grateful for you sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And I'm really excited about our collaboration with this ongoing collection of resources. And I just wanted to throw it to you to ask, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with today to close out this topic? Or do you feel like we've done a good job so far?
I think we've done an amazing introduction for anybody who's really interested in delving into this further. They've heard a little bit about it and want to know more. I think we've hit some very key ways of going about informing yourself about what's out there and looking at reputable pieces and things that are quite interesting as well. And I think I would just like to encourage folks to allow themselves to explore, allow yourself to explore and learn and share with others what you learn that you think has real credibility and not be so limited by the constraints that were thrust upon us by our societal images about the stigma, that there's something really interesting here, that is an interesting story to explore, and just let yourself do it. Have a good time doing it.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate you taking this time today, and I look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Thank you, Caleb. I've enjoyed this too. So happy trails.
And that's the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening or watching. If you like WTUFO and you want it to keep existing, support us at patreon.com/WTUFO or on YouTube or on Buzzsprout for as little as you want per month. Patreon or YouTube or Buzzsprout, this show is brought to you by you. So thank you very much for your support. I hope you keep listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.